My house burned down, and when I showed up at my son's door, his wife looked me straight in the eye and said, "He doesn't want you here. Go." My son just stood there in silence. I walked away with nothing but the clothes on my back, my heart heavier than the ashes I left behind. But deep inside, I carried something they never imagined, a plan I had been quietly preparing for years. The very next morning, the first crack in their perfect story began to show, and that was only the beginning. Stay with me until the end of this story, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. The house didn't fall. It folded into itself, a tired chest exhaling. By morning the crews were gone and smoke hung over the black frame. I stood inside the tape with ash on my shoes. 37 years of breakfasts and paychecks lay under a skin of gray that wouldn't brush off. An inspector asked if I had family. "My son's across town," I said. I didn't add that my wife has been gone 5 winters. He nodded and left me with the smell of wet smoke and the hush of a house that had stopped speaking. I walked the rooms. 2 mugs fused in the sink, a photo frame warped, my hammer, handle scorched. I slid papers into a canvas bag, the deed folder, insurance numbers, a letter from my granddaughter, Eva, with a purple kite. "All right," I told the place. "You did your job." I closed the gate and headed for my truck. North Asheville looked ordinary, a dog in a sweater, a church sign swapping verses, a couple mulling paint chips. I kept seeing Clayton at 7, sprinting after a baseball in our yard. "You're still standing," I told the mirror. Clayton's split level sat on a corner lot. I parked and shut off the engine. Mountain air held a damp chill. I rang the bell. Through the glass I saw a neat row of shoes. The door opened 6 inches. "Dad," he said, scanning the street and then my face. His hair, once wild, was combed into order. "Clay," I said, "there was a fire." "I know. Lorraine saw it online. Are you okay?" "I'm here," I said. "House is gone. I could use a couch for a night or 2. I'll be out early. Insurance calls." He didn't answer at once. At the hallway bend, Lorraine's outline held still, careful to remain the shadow that speaks. Clayton lifted his hand halfway. "Dad, Lorraine doesn't want you here." The words landed slow and deep, like cold in bone. "I'm still your father," I said, quiet. "I know. It's just that Eva's got school, and the house is a lot right now." Lorraine didn't step forward. She didn't have to. "Clay," I said, steady. "I won't be a burden. Couch is plenty. I'll be gone before the bus." He looked over his shoulder, hunting permission. In the glass I caught my reflection. Soot. Lines. A man older than yesterday and still myself. I tried again. "You remember the flood in '94? I said. "Propane leak. I shut the line with a wrench. We slept at the church and made it through." "That was different," he said. "We had Mom. We had a plan." "So make one now," I said. "With me on the couch." His shoulders dropped a fraction. The door opened 2 inches, then closed those same inches. "I'm sorry," he said, eyes down. "Lorraine doesn't want you here." He repeated it like a line meant to carry the fault elsewhere. From the living room came Eva's laugh from a cartoon, clear and light. The sound lifted and cut me at the same time. I pictured the kite and the way she spells Grandpa with an extra P. I had meant to bring the small wooden puzzle I saved. In the pause between breaths, I knew what I hadn't wanted to name. The fire had found something fragile waiting to burn. "All right," I said. "I hear you." "Dad, it's fine." I stepped back. A smudge of ash marked the doorknob. I wiped it with my handkerchief. "No mess," I said. "That's me. I'll call you tomorrow." "You do that." I walked the path slow, not because of my knees, though they complained, but because I needed the time. At the curb I turned. He still held the door 6 inches open, as if our history could take only that much light. Then he closed it. The sound was polite. In the truck I put the bag on the seat and let my hands rest on the wheel. The mat wore a new gray from my shoes. I brushed at it and only spread the color around. Somewhere a motel sign was blinking vacancy, but not yet. I wanted to walk along the parkway, the cool air rinsing the day off my face. I started the engine. The house shrank in the mirror. On the seat, The letter with the kite slid against the deed folder. "We're not done," I told the quiet cab. "Not with today. Not with them. Not with me." What the fire took, it also revealed. Some doors close and bruise. I drove toward the ridge, thinking who to call first. I had a name in mind, a friend who never needed permission to stand in a doorway. I walked away from Clayton's doorstep slowly, each step heavier than the last. The streetlights stretched my shadow long across the sidewalk, like a silent witness trailing me. Behind me, the sound of the door closing echoed louder in my chest than the roar of the fire that had eaten my house. The night air smelled of pine and wet pavement, but all I could feel was the emptiness where family should have been. My son's voice, hesitant, rehearsed, still clung to my ears. "Dad, Lorraine doesn't want you here." Those words were going to outlast the ash on my shoes. I turned the corner and kept walking. Houses on the block looked warm, the kind of ordinary glow where families argued over bedtime or watched the news together. I remembered when mine used to be the same, before Lorraine's shadow stretched across our table. I couldn't shake the image of her peeking from behind Clayton, eyes hard, silent but commanding. The fire may have stolen my roof, but she was trying to steal my place. My mind drifted to a night months back. We were seated at the dinner table. Me, Clayton, Lorraine, and little Eva. I had brought over a peach cobbler, still warm, thinking it would bring some sweetness into the evening. Lorraine's fork tapped the plate. Just once. Sharp. "We all move on differently, don't we?" she said, glancing at me but keeping her smile pinned in place for Clayton. The words carried a sting I pretended not to feel, though my chest burned hotter than the coffee in my cup. Clayton stayed quiet, sipping his drink. Eva talked about school, unaware of the silent war unfolding in the space between her parents and me. Another time, Lorraine handed me a folding chair instead of pulling out a seat at the main table. "So we don't crowd the dining room," she explained. All pleasant on the surface. I laughed it off. But the message was clear. I was already being moved toward the edges of their lives. Tonight, standing on the curb outside their home, those little humiliations resurfaced one by one, like sparks catching dry grass. I kept walking until the streets thinned out. The hum of traffic gave way to the distant bark of a dog and the soft whir of a porch fan. My legs ached, but I didn't slow down. Somewhere on the edge of town there was a small motel with a neon sign that always flickered. I'd seen it enough times driving Eva home from piano lessons. The irony wasn't lost on me, that I was headed there now, alone, after being turned away from my own blood. As I passed houses with lit windows, I caught glimpses of families through curtains, kids chasing each other across living rooms, couples folding laundry, a man rubbing his wife's shoulders while she laughed at the TV. Each scene was a reminder of what I'd lost twice, first to the fire, and now to rejection. My body felt tired in a way deeper than age. My heart carried the weight of 2 blows in a single day. Yet I refused to let my back bend. The motel was quiet. Just 2 cars in the lot. I pushed open the glass door, and the clerk looked up from his magazine. "Need a room?" he asked. Tone casual. "Yes," I said. My voice sounded steadier than I expected. He slid the form toward me. "How many nights?" "1. Cash." I counted the bills carefully, laying them down without a tremor. No need for credit cards. No need for records. Just a bed, a roof, and a locked door that answered to me. He handed me a key with a cracked fob. "Room 7. I nodded, took it, and made my way down the short hall that smelled faintly of bleach and old carpet. Inside, the room was plain, beige curtains, a lamp with a crooked shade, a bedspread patterned in faded swirls. It was no home, but it was mine for tonight. I set my bag on the chair, sat on the edge of the bed, and dialed Clayton. The phone rang, once, twice, 3 times. No answer. I tried again. Nothing. The silence on the line carried the same weight as the silence at his table. It wasn't just a missed call. It was a bond untied. I set the phone down and stared at it for a long while. My hand itched to try again, but I clenched it into a fist instead. "I won't beg," I whispered into the still room. The words tasted bitter but strong. I had pleaded enough in my life, for fairness, for recognition, for a seat at my own family's table. No more. I pulled back the curtain and looked out at the night. From the distance, where the ridge met the sky, I could still see a faint glow rising, my house, or what was left of it, still smoldering. Smoke twisted into the darkness, curling like a warning. I leaned against the window, the glass cool on my forehead. "The fire was just the start," I murmured. "The real flames are in their hearts." I stayed there, watching the smoke until my eyes stung, not from ash, but from everything it meant. The motel bed creaked under my weight as I shifted from one side to the other, the stiff springs reminding me this was no place for rest. Sleep wouldn't come, no matter how many times I closed my eyes. Each time I did, I saw that door shutting in my face, Clayton's hesitant eyes, Lorraine's shadow at his shoulder. The neon sign outside the window flickered through the curtains, throwing broken strips of light against the wall. Each flash carved strange shapes in the dark, shadows twisting like the thoughts gnawing at me. From the other rooms came muffled sounds, a television left on too loud, a couple laughing, footsteps pacing. Those small reminders of life made the silence in my own room more unbearable. The world kept moving, and yet I was frozen, lying in a bed that wasn't mine, haunted by voices I couldn't escape. My mind drifted, not toward peace, but to older wounds. Years ago, I had warned Clayton about a business deal. He was still young, eager to impress his friends with quick profits. "Son, don't put your savings into that scheme," I told him. "Easy money has teeth." He waved me off, stubborn pride on his face. And then Lorraine, still just his fiancée at the time, chimed in. "Maybe it's time he makes his own choices," she said sweetly, almost innocently. But the words carried a sharper edge than she let on. I remember how Clayton leaned toward her, not me. He went ahead with that deal, lost most of what he had saved. When he came to me later, angry and embarrassed, it wasn't Lorraine he blamed, it was me. He said I should have pushed harder, should have stopped him. That moment lodged itself deep, and tonight it rose back up, raw as ever, lying there. I began piecing it together. This wasn't sudden. Lorraine hadn't just decided yesterday that I was unwelcome. Her voice had been weaving its way into Clayton's decisions for years, a quiet drip of influence shaping him, pulling him further from me. Each small dismissal, each silence at the dinner table, each smile that carried hidden judgment, it all aligned. My son hadn't simply grown distant, he'd surrendered. Lorraine wasn't just my daughter-in-law anymore. She was the hand moving the pieces. I thought back to when Clayton was a boy, maybe 9 years old. We'd sit at the kitchen table with a chessboard between us. I'd teach him to think ahead, to see not just the move in front of him, but the trap 5 turns later. He was sharp, quick to learn. Always protect your king. I used to tell him. Tonight, that memory soured. Because now, he wasn't guarding anything. He was the pawn, and Lorraine was playing the game. The clarity cut deeper than the fire, deeper than the rejection at his door. I hadn't just lost my house. I was losing my son to someone else's control. I sat up, pulled the thin motel blanket around my shoulders, and whispered into the dark. This isn't just rejection, it's control. The words steadied me, like a stone in my hand. I realized then that silence would finish what the flames had started. If I stayed quiet, I'd be erased piece by piece, folded out of their lives until Eva might not even remember who I was. My hands trembled, not with fear but with something new, resistance. I wouldn't let Lorraine rewrite my story in my own family. I reached for the small notebook I kept in my bag, the same one where I used to jot reminders for groceries or lists for home repairs. I flipped it open, pen scratching across the paper with a weight that felt heavier than ink. I wrote only one line. If she's rewriting my place in this family, I will write it back. The sentence stared back at me, stark and unbending. I closed the notebook, set it on the nightstand, and finally lay down again. The neon light kept flickering, But this time the shadows on the wall seemed less haunting and more like a call to action. My eyes closed at last, not in peace, but in readiness. Tomorrow, I would no longer turn away. Tomorrow, I would begin to speak. The sun was sliding down when I turned onto Clayton Street, the same road I had driven hundreds of times when family dinners still meant something. My shoes scraped the pavement, carrying with them the dust and ash of what had been my home. Each familiar fence and mailbox seemed to mock me now, reminders of a neighborhood that once felt like an extension of my own family. I slowed when I saw his car parked neatly in the driveway, shining in the fading light. That was all the confirmation I needed. He was home. I paused at the edge of the lawn. The grass was trimmed, green and perfect, not a single weed poking through. It looked like a painting, too precise, too manicured. I couldn't help but contrast it with the charred rubble still clinging to my clothes, the soot under my fingernails that no soap could wash away. My house had turned to ashes, but here, just a mile away, everything gleamed like nothing had happened. I tightened my grip on my cane and walked forward, my steps firm, my chest heavy but resolute. When I knocked this time, I didn't stand back with lowered eyes. My knuckles rapped against the door loud and steady, leaving no room for hesitation. A moment later, the door creaked open, and there was Clayton. He froze, his mouth parting as if he had been caught off guard. "Dad," he muttered, surprise coloring his voice. I didn't wait for an invitation. "Why did you let her speak for you?" I asked, my words sharp, leaving no space for retreat. "Why did you stand there silent while Lorraine told me I wasn't welcome?" Clayton's eyes flickered, guilt passing over them like a shadow. "It's not that simple," he started, shifting his weight as though the floor beneath him had turned unsteady. "Simple enough," I snapped back. "You're my son. I raised you, clothed you, worked myself to the bone so you'd have every chance I never did. And you couldn't even say a word when I stood at your door with nowhere else to go?" His jaw worked, his lips parted, but no clear answer came. He looked like a boy again, cornered after breaking a window, unable to confess but too guilty to lie. My chest burned with a mix of sorrow and rage. Before he could find his footing, I heard her voice behind him, calm, steady, and laced with the kind of authority she should never have had over me. "This isn't your home, Melvin," Lorraine said, stepping into view. She wore a cardigan and a smile that was anything but kind. "We have our own life now. You need to understand that." Her words weren't loud, but they cut deeper than the fire had. Clayton didn't move. He didn't contradict her. He just stood there, shoulders slumped, as if her voice had more weight than mine ever did. My gaze shifted between them, searching for some flicker of resistance in him, some sign that my son still had a spine, but all I saw was surrender. "You've made your point," I said slowly, steadying my voice even as my blood pounded in my ears. "But don't mistake my silence for weakness." Lorraine crossed her arms, tilting her head slightly. Her lips pursed in that way that told me she believed she had already won. "It's better for everyone if you find somewhere else to stay. You'll be more comfortable. We'll be more comfortable." Clayton lowered his eyes, as if the floor had answers he couldn't find in his father's face. I leaned on my cane, not because I needed it at that moment, but because I wanted them to see what I held. Wood worn by years, carved by use, a symbol of age, yes, but also of endurance. I tapped it once against the step, the sound echoing. "I built the ground you're standing on," I said, my voice low but sharp as glass. "Every board, every sacrifice, every chance you ever had, it came from me. Don't forget that. You can shut the door on me, but you can't erase me." For the first time, Clayton flinched. He didn't speak, but I saw it, the ripple of shame in his eyes. Lorraine, however, kept her mask. She offered nothing but a tight smile, her hand brushing his arm in quiet command. I didn't wait for a reply. Turning, I stepped off that perfect lawn and back onto the pavement, my voice carried over my shoulder, not a plea but a warning. This fight has only begun. The air was cool against my face as I walked away, each step heavier but steadier. Behind me, I heard the faint creak of the door closing again, but this time I wasn't the one left in silence. This time, it was them. The community center courtyard buzzed with chatter as neighbors gathered after the fire. Folding chairs were set in rows. A makeshift podium stood near the front, and a potluck spread of casseroles and store-bought pies lined a long table. I wasn't there for food. I came because I needed to see faces that still remembered me as more than ashes and burden. Franklin Cade spotted me first. He lived 3 doors down from me for 20 years. And though he wasn't one to waste words, he gave me a nod of recognition. That small gesture meant more than he knew. I returned it with a quiet, "Evening, Franklin," before finding a seat along the edge of the crowd. Then I saw them. Clayton and Lorraine walked in, polished, smiling, the picture of composure. Clayton's shirt pressed crisp, Lorraine's cardigan draped just so. They moved easily among the crowd, shaking hands, offering condolences, telling people how they'd been helping family through difficult times. My jaw clenched. Helping family? I was family. And they had slammed their door in my face. The meeting rolled on, volunteers speaking about relief funds, local officials outlining rebuilding efforts, but my attention never drifted far from those two. Lorraine laughed lightly at something someone said, her hand resting on Clayton's arm as though he were her prize to display. And he let her, always letting her. As the gathering shifted into open conversation, people milled about. That's when Lorraine's voice carried across the space. Clear, calm, but sharp enough for everyone to catch it. "It's hard when people can't take care of their own homes," she said, her tone light, almost sympathetic. But every word aimed like an arrow. A couple of strangers chuckled. The kind of polite laugh people use when they don't know the backstory. My ears burned, my hands tightening around the head of my cane. Clayton stood beside her, lips pressed together, eyes cast down as though the floor were safer than looking at me. He didn't stop her. He didn't correct her. Humiliation crawled up my neck. I felt exposed, like I'd been stripped bare in front of people who barely knew me. For years, my sweat and labor had built a life, roofing in July heat, hauling lumber with my back screaming. And now, with a single sentence, she reduced me to a man too weak to keep his own house standing. I rose slowly, each movement deliberate. Conversations around me dulled as I cleared my throat. "Don't mistake tragedy for weakness," I said, my voice steady, carrying further than I thought it would. "I've survived more than flames. Fire can take wood and walls, but it can't take the man who built them." The courtyard grew quiet, heads turned. Lorraine's smile faltered, stiffening into something brittle. Clayton shifted uncomfortably, his shoulders curling inward as though he wished he could vanish. I continued, eyes fixed on them. "You want to stand here and talk about helping family? Then act like it. Don't parade yourselves while shutting the door on blood." No one laughed now. The air was taut, thick with discomfort. But for once I didn't shrink from it. I let it sit there. Lorraine's eyes narrowed, her lips pressed tight. She hated losing control of a room. Clayton still said nothing, and in that silence, the truth of his surrender rang louder than anything else. When the gathering finally broke apart, people lingered in small clusters, whispering. I stepped toward the edge of the courtyard, intent on leaving with my dignity intact. When Clayton approached me, his voice was hushed, strained. "Dad, why did you have to do that? Why make things worse?" I turned to face him, my cane planted firmly at my side. "Worse?" I echoed. "Son, silence was killing me faster than any fire. You let her strip me piece by piece, and you stood there. Tonight, I decided I won't be cut down quietly anymore." He swallowed, eyes darting toward where Lorraine stood a few paces away, glaring like a hawk guarding her prey. "You don't understand," he muttered, voice cracking under the weight of his own conflict. "No, Clayton," I said firmly. "I understand all too well. You think keeping the peace means surrender, but there's a difference between peace and submission. Tonight, I drew my line." For a moment, he had no reply. His mouth opened, then closed, his shoulders sagging under the weight of words he couldn't speak. Lorraine's stare burned from behind him, cold and sharp. I turned and walked toward the parking lot, each step deliberate, my back straight, though my heart felt like it carried stones. As the night air cooled my face, I whispered to myself, I drew my line tonight, and tomorrow they'll know I won't step back. Arden Briscoe's office sat on the second floor of a weathered brick building near downtown, the kind of place where the blinds were always half tilted and the wooden floors creaked like they were tired of carrying secrets. I pushed the door open, and the smell of old paper and polished wood washed over me. Arden looked up from behind his desk, his reading glasses perched low on his nose. "Melvin," he said, standing, extending his hand with a firmness that reminded me of the man I used to know from church meetings and fishing trips. "You look worn down." "I've had better weeks," I answered, sinking into the chair across from him. My clothes still smelled faintly of smoke, no matter how many times I scrubbed them at the motel laundromat. House burned to the ground. Clayton and Lorraine shut me out. But something tells me this isn't just about a roof and walls anymore. Arden studied me, his brow furrowing. "You came here because you trust me, so let me show you something that came across my desk." He slid a folder toward me, thick with photocopies of documents. The top page bore my name, half there, half crossed through with neat black lines. I stared at it, confused. "These are deed copies," Arden explained, "and insurance paperwork, some of them recent." "Take a closer look." I flipped through the pages, my eyes catching strange details, dates adjusted by a single day, my signature clipped in ways that looked mechanical, as though someone had scanned and dropped it onto paper. Even my middle initial was missing on one form, replaced with Lorraine's. My stomach turned cold. "What am I looking at?" I asked, though part of me already knew. "You're looking at someone trying to move you off your own property rights," Arden said, his voice even, but his eyes sharp. "And Melvin, that doesn't happen by accident." I gripped the folder tighter, the papers crackling under my fingers. "She's been at it this whole time, hasn't she? Playing hostess in public, whispering poison in private. And now digging into my land, my house, what's left of it." Arden leaned forward, elbows on the desk. "If your name is being pushed off these papers, it means forgery, or at the very least manipulation. And Lorraine strikes me as the type who knows exactly how to smile for the neighbors while moving the pieces behind the curtain." My chest burned. Not from smoke this time, but from fury, betrayal written in black ink and neat margins. It wasn't just a door slammed in my face. It was an erasure, calculated and patient. Arden's voice cut through my thoughts. "You need to stay sharp. Don't sign anything they put in front of you. Don't let them corner you in conversation. This is bigger than family squabbles now. It's about what you've built your whole life on." I nodded, though my hands trembled as I slid the papers back into the folder. "They think I'm too old, too tired to notice. They think fire and humiliation softened me." Arden's eyes softened. "You're not finished, Melvin. Just make sure you don't walk into their trap blind. I'll do some digging, but you watch your back." Later, in the dim motel room, I laid the folder on the bedspread. The neon sign outside the window flickered, casting red light over the pages. I spread them out like cards in a crooked hand of poker. My hands trembled, not from weakness but from the weight of what I now knew. Ashes from my burned shoes still clung to the carpet. As I brushed them off, they scattered over the papers, little gray specks against white sheets. I stared at them, realizing the fire wasn't the end of destruction, it was the beginning of a scheme. "If they want to erase me on paper," I whispered, "I'll carve the truth in stone." The vow settled heavy in my chest, steadier than the grief that had gnawed at me since the fire. Determination, sharp and unyielding, replaced despair. I had been quiet too long, but I wasn't about to vanish. Just as I began gathering the papers back into the folder, a sharp knock echoed against the motel door. My heart jolted. Too late at night for a visitor, too firm to be casual. I froze, Kane resting at my side, eyes fixed on the door. The papers lay scattered like evidence. "So soon?" I muttered under my breath, tightening my grip on the cane. The knock from the night before had rattled me. I'd sat frozen for several minutes, cane gripped in my hand, waiting for whoever stood beyond the motel door to reveal themselves. When I finally rose and pulled the door open, no one was there. The parking lot sat quiet under the humming streetlight, the asphalt slick from a recent drizzle. Only a folded piece of paper lay at my feet. I bent to pick it up. The words printed across it were sharp, like accusations carved into stone: irresponsible, unstable, a danger to himself and others. No name was written, but the intent was obvious. It was about me. My chest tightened. This wasn't the work of strangers, it was Lorraine's handiwork. She had found a way to brand me even when I kept to myself. By morning, the unease hadn't lifted. I walked down to the neighborhood cafe, a small place that smelled of bacon grease and burnt coffee. It was the sort of diner where folks lingered over their mugs, trading stories louder than the radio humming in the background. I sat in the corner booth, ordering a black coffee, my ears pricked to the murmur around me. "Sad business. That fire," a woman near the counter whispered. "But I heard it wasn't just bad luck." Another voice chimed in. "They say he was careless with money. Maybe with matches, too. Some people can't manage themselves." The words struck harder than I expected. I looked down at the steaming cup in front of me, the surface trembling as I steadied my hand. My patience was cooling as quickly as the coffee. Lorraine's lies had seeped beyond family walls. They were in the air of this town now, repeated by strangers who didn't know me, never swung a hammer beside me, never shared bread at my table. I sipped, forcing calm, though inside anger pressed against my ribs. Every whisper felt like ash rubbed into an open wound. When I left the cafe, Franklin Cade was waiting outside, leaning against his truck. His eyes carried the weight of someone who'd heard too much and hated to repeat it. "Melvin," he said carefully, "I thought you should know before it gets back to you another way." "What is it this time?" My voice came out rougher than I intended. He scratched the back of his neck. "Clayton, folks asked him about you, about the fire, the house, everything. And he repeated what Lorraine's been saying, that maybe you weren't thinking straight, that you'd mismanaged things for years. He didn't shout it, but he didn't stop it either." I stood still, the morning air heavy on my shoulders. My own son, echoing lies that painted me as a fool. It was one thing for Lorraine to spin her web. It was another to hear Clayton weaving the same threads. "Franklin," I said slowly, "you've known me a long time. Do you believe that?" He shook his head firmly. "Not for a second. But people hear a man's own son speak. They take it as gospel." I nodded, swallowing the bitterness rising in my throat. "Thank you for telling me. Better to hear it straight." Walking back to the motel, each step felt like trudging through thick mud. My son's silence at the doorstep had stung, but his voice repeating her lies, now that was betrayal carved deep. In the room, I spread the papers Arden had given me across the bed again. Deeds, insurance claims, every fragile sheet that carried proof of my name. I pulled out my notebook, ash-stained from the night of the fire, and began writing. Dates, conversations, details that only I would remember. Lorraine's remarks at dinners, Clayton's hesitations, the flyer slid under my door, the whispers at the cafe, Franklin's account. Every word became a shield, every page a defense. "If they spread lies," I said aloud, my pen pressing hard against the page, "I'll fight with truth." I kept writing until the margins filled, until my hand cramped and ink smeared across my knuckles. The notebook no longer felt like a relic of grief. It was becoming my weapon. Night fell again, the neon sign outside blinking its weary rhythm. I sat by the window, the hum of traffic faint in the distance. My phone buzzed against the nightstand, a voicemail from an unknown number. I pressed play. Silence at first, then a faint crackle, and then a woman's whisper, sharp enough to cut through the static. "Stop digging, Melvin." The message ended, My hand tightened around the phone. The message from Clayton arrived in the late afternoon, short and stiff. "Dad, we should all sit down tonight. Lorraine thinks it's best. Please come by." I stared at the screen for a long while, the words ringing hollow. Clayton didn't write that. His fingers might have tapped the letters, but the voice behind them was hers. Still, I decided to go. I slipped my notebook into my coat pocket, its pages heavy with dates, remarks, and Arden's photocopied documents. If tonight was a trial, then I wouldn't stand defenseless. By the time I reached their house, the sun had dipped low, and the glow from their windows spilled across the trimmed lawn like an invitation meant to disarm. I paused at the walkway, breathing in slowly. This wasn't a homecoming, it was a battleground. Inside, the air was too still. Lorraine sat upright in the armchair, legs crossed, voice soft but edged with command. Clayton leaned against the mantel, avoiding my eyes. My granddaughter Eva perched silently on the couch, her young face pale, caught in a storm she hadn't chosen. "Melvin," Lorraine began, her smile thin, "we thought it was time to address these concerns." "Everyone's worried about you." I stayed quiet, letting her lay out her script. "You've been unstable," she continued. "The fire was tragic, yes, but people wonder how it happened. Your behavior at the community center, embarrassing Clayton like that, well, it shows you might not be in the best state to make decisions anymore." The humiliation cut deep, but I kept my voice still. I let her weave her net, watching Clayton's shoulders slump lower with each word. Eva's hands twisted in her lap, her eyes darting between us. Finally, I spoke. "Are you finished?" Lorraine blinked, surprised at the interruption. "I'm only concerned." I pulled the notebook from my coat and laid the papers across the coffee table. "Then let's all be concerned together. These," I said, tapping the photocopies, "are records from Arden Briscoe, property deeds, insurance claims, every line checked twice. And here, see the irregularities, dates shifted, signatures nudged. My name missing where it once stood." Clayton leaned forward, confusion flickering. Lorraine's composure faltered, her fingers tightening on the armrest. "That's nonsense," she snapped. "Anyone can misread a form." "No," I said firmly. "This isn't a mistake. Someone's been tampering, and the trail points straight to you." The room crackled. For once. Clayton looked at his wife, not with blind defense, but with uncertainty. Lorraine's mask thinned, her calmness was cracking. Then Franklin Cade cleared his throat. He had been invited under the guise of neighborly perspective, but his voice carried more weight than they expected. "I was there," he said steadily. "I saw Lorraine push Clayton about signing papers after the fire, told him it was best to move quickly before his father got confused. I didn't think much of it then. But seeing these documents..." Clayton's face drained of color. He looked from Franklin to me, then back to Lorraine. "Is this true?" he whispered. Lorraine's lips tightened. "They're twisting everything. Franklin doesn't know what he saw. And Melvin, he's desperate, clinging to ashes." Her words rang sharp. But the power had shifted. For the first time, Eva looked at me with something more than fear. There was recognition, even sympathy. I met her gaze, steady and unbroken. She lowered her eyes, but not before I caught the flicker of belief. Lorraine stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "This charade ends now," she spat. "You think pieces of paper and an old man's scribbles will undo me? You'll regret this." She stormed out, the door slamming so hard the frames on the wall rattled. Silence swallowed the room. Clayton stood frozen, torn between following her and facing me. Eva sat perfectly still, her small voice breaking the quiet at last. "Grandpa, I believe you." I felt a swell in my chest, a glimmer of hope carved from despair. As I gathered the papers back into my notebook, I whispered to myself, low enough that only I could hear, "The truth is finally on the table, but the war has just begun." The morning light filtered through the thin motel curtains, falling across the papers I had left scattered on the bed. They glowed in the sun's touch as though the truth itself wanted to be seen. My body ached from the tension of the night before, but my mind was clear. I had walked into Lorraine's trap and left it standing, stripped bare for everyone to see. The war was far from over, but at least my words had landed. At least Eva's eyes had shown me she believed. I sat at the edge of the bed, rubbing my temples, replaying Lorraine's exit in my mind, the slam of the door, the venom in her voice. It should have left me broken. Instead, I felt something close to relief, even if fatigue weighed on my bones. I was still standing, and I would keep standing. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. When I opened the door, Eva stood there, small and hesitant, her school bag slung over her shoulder. "Grandpa?" she whispered, slipping inside quickly, as if afraid someone might see. She perched on the chair by the window, fidgeting with her hands. "I don't believe her anymore," she said at last, her voice trembling. "I saw the way she looked when you showed those papers. She wasn't calm, she was scared. She lies about you all the time, but yesterday, I knew it wasn't true." Her words pierced me deeper than any insult Lorraine could sling. I reached across, resting my hand gently over hers. "Eva, I wish you never had to be in the middle of this. You deserve peace, not storms." Tears glistened in her eyes, but she blinked them away. "I just wanted you to know you're not alone." I nodded, my throat tight. "That means more than you know." She stayed only a few minutes before slipping back out, but her visit left a warmth in my chest. It was bittersweet, joy at her trust, sorrow that a child had to pick sides in a fight she never started. Later that afternoon, Franklin called. His tone was uneasy. "Melvin, there was shouting next door this morning. Clayton and Lorraine. Could hear them through the walls." I closed my eyes. I could picture it. Lorraine's voice sharp, Clayton's cracking under the strain. My son, the boy I once taught to stand tall when kids mocked him on the playground, now bending under the weight of a wife's manipulation. "Did you catch what it was about?" I asked. "Not the words," Franklin admitted. "But it wasn't calm. He sounded broken." After the call, I sat with my memories, my mind drifting to Clayton as a teenager. I had told him once, strength isn't about being louder, it's about knowing when to hold the line. Somewhere along the way, that lesson had slipped through his grasp. Watching him now was like watching a man drown in shallow water, unable to push his feet down and rise. The following days brought whispers. 2 of my cousins phoned me. Voices hushed. They admitted they had believed Lorraine's tales, but after the tribunal, doubt had crept in. "Maybe we judged you too quickly." "Melvin," one said, guilt heavy in her words. Vindication brushed my shoulders, but it wasn't triumph. I knew how people worked. When Lorraine sensed her grip weakening, she'd lash out harder. A cornered wolf is always the most dangerous. And she was cornered. I saw it in the way her car sped down the street, in the way neighbors avoided her gaze. The woman who had built her control on whispers was now the subject of them, but I also knew she wouldn't collapse quietly. She would sharpen every weapon she had left. That night, exhaustion finally pushed me to bed. The papers still lay across the blankets, their edges curling as though even they were weary of the fight. I drifted until the phone buzzed on the nightstand. One new message. It was from Clayton. The words were few, but heavy. "I don't know how much longer I can hold this together." I sat upright, staring at the screen in the dim glow. My son was reaching a breaking point, torn between the woman who bound him and the father who raised him. I whispered into the quiet room, "Then hold, son, just hold until the truth carries you through." But deep inside, I knew the storm was about to hit harder than ever. Arden Briscoe met me on the courthouse steps, the morning sun casting long shadows across the stone columns. His briefcase hung heavy at his side, but his expression was steady. "Melvin," he said, gripping my shoulder, "we've got more than just a case. We've got leverage. Lorraine's forged signatures, Franklin's testimony, and the way she handled herself in front of the family. It all lines up. I breathed deep, the courthouse doors looming behind him like the gateway to something final. For months, words had been my only weapon. Now, action had stepped forward, wrapped in legal filings and stamped with the weight of justice. Arden's voice cut through my fatigue. "We filed the injunction this morning. It stops her cold from moving property, changing deeds, or touching a cent of what's rightfully yours." Relief swelled, though caution tempered it. "So the doors are opening?" I asked, glancing at the courthouse. "Slowly," Arden admitted, "but they're opening." I nodded, feeling dignity rise in me like a tide finally turning. For the first time since the fire, the battle wasn't just about my voice. It was on paper, official and undeniable. By afternoon, Lorraine's desperation had begun to leak through the cracks she once plastered over so carefully. At the community center, where displaced families still met for help, she made her entrance in a tailored coat, smile bright as porcelain. "It's heartbreaking," she told a small circle of neighbors, "when someone refuses to take responsibility for his own failings." I stood off to the side, silent, watching. Franklin Cade, arms crossed, didn't let her words pass unanswered. "Failings?" His tone carried the weight of a man done with pretense. "Funny, Lorraine. I recall you pushing Clayton about signing those papers. I heard it with my own ears." The murmurs spread fast. Others leaned in, curious, then doubtful. One woman whispered loudly enough for all to hear, "Didn't Melvin's lawyer already file something against her?" Lorraine's smile stiffened, but she fought to hold it. "You've all been misled," she insisted, her voice sharper than before. Yet the room had changed. The people who once accepted her polished stories now eyed her with caution, as though they saw the strings of her performance dangling loose. I didn't need to add a word. Truth had begun to breathe on its own. Later that evening, Clayton appeared at my motel. He looked worn down, tie loosened, eyes bloodshot. He closed the door behind him and leaned against it, as if bracing himself. "Dad," he said softly, "I don't know how I let it get this far." His words cracked something in me. I waited, giving him the silence to gather courage. "She told me you'd lost your grip, that you couldn't handle the house, the money, anything. And I believed her because it was easier than admitting she was manipulating me. I've been blind." His shoulders shook, shame folding him inward. I stepped closer, laying a hand on his arm. "You're my son. You were caught in her net, but you're not the first man to get tangled in lies. What matters is whether you stay there." Tears streamed down his face, and for the first time in years, he let me hold him. Brief, raw, but real. The road ahead would not be easy. Bridges burned, take time to rebuild, but at least he had turned his face toward me, not away. Days later, a gathering pulled both family and neighbors together. Lorraine entered with fire in her eyes. No mask this time. She pointed straight at me. "He's turning you all against me. Don't you see what he's doing? He wants sympathy, wants to paint me as the villain." The room tensed, but I didn't rise to her volume. I opened my folder, laying the injunction papers flat for all to see. "This isn't sympathy," I said calmly. "It's evidence. It's action. It's what truth looks like when it's written and witnessed," Franklin added from the corner. "And I'll testify to what I saw, to what I heard." Lorraine's composure cracked, her voice shrill, her face twisted in panic. The authority she once commanded with a smile was gone. Her control had slipped from her fingers, and she knew it. The silence that followed was heavier than any shouting. I looked her in the eye and said, "You've had your stage. Now it's time for the truth to stand." She stormed out, leaving the air thick with the aftermath of a confrontation everyone present would remember. That night, I sat alone on the motel balcony, the cool breeze rustling through the cheap curtains behind me. The city lights flickered, and for a brief moment, I allowed myself to breathe freely. I had drawn my line, and the world had seen it. Then, a sound at the door. A slip of paper slid under the threshold. I bent down, picked it up. No name, no signature, only 4 words scrawled in uneven ink. "This isn't over." I held it in my hand, staring at the threat cloaked in anonymity. My war with Lorraine had shifted, but not ended. The fight was far from finished. The note lay on the motel floor like a coiled snake. This isn't over. 4 words written in a jagged hand. No signature. No clue except the chill they carried. I sat on the edge of the bed with the paper between my fingers, staring at the parking lot beyond the curtain. Shadows stretched long under the pale yellow light, shifting whenever a car passed. I didn't dare turn off the lamp. Sleep wouldn't come anyway. Every sound, the creak of a door, the crunch of gravel, even the hum of the ice machine, sounded like footsteps coming closer. I leaned against the window frame, cane across my knees, my reflection staring back at me in the glass. Fear sat heavy on my chest, but it wasn't enough to drown me. If Lorraine still had people willing to slip notes under my door, then she wasn't fighting alone. That meant she was desperate, and desperation could be dangerous. My pulse slowed as I repeated the words in my head. Grim determination, not fear. If she thought paper could undo me, she had forgotten who built the house she was trying to erase. By morning, I folded the note carefully into my notebook and made my way to Arden Briscoe's office. His small law practice sat on a quiet street, blinds half open, dust motes floating in the sunbeams. He looked up as soon as I stepped inside. "You look like you didn't sleep a minute," he said, concern shading his tone. I handed him the folded paper. "Slipped under my door last night." Arden read it once, jaw tightening. "This confirms what I suspected. Lorraine isn't acting alone. Somebody's leaking information, maybe even feeding her moves. That means every step we take from here has to be guarded." I sank into the leather chair across from his desk, the weight of exhaustion pressing down. "So even now, I'm not safe." "You're safer than you were yesterday," he countered. "But safety isn't the same as peace. Whoever's helping her knows where to find you. That's not coincidence." His words carried a chill deeper than the note. If Lorraine had allies beyond the family, the fight wasn't just personal, it was widening. That afternoon, Franklin Cade stopped by Arden's office. His hat in hand, he leaned against the doorframe, eyes steady. "Melvin, I saw something last night near your old place," he said. "Someone was parked across the street, lights off, stayed there nearly an hour, too far to see who, but not some kid wasting gas. They were watching." "Watching ashes," I muttered. "Even ruins can't be left alone." Franklin frowned. "That's not just curiosity. That's someone with a stake in what comes next." He shifted his gaze to Arden. "You think Lorraine's pulling strings that far?" Arden nodded grimly. "She can't move property on her own anymore. But if she had help, someone in paperwork, real estate, even banking, it explains how her story gained traction before we caught it." The thought hollowed me out. My fight wasn't with one woman's lies. It was with a web spun wider than I had guessed. Arden pulled out a folder, laying fresh documents across his desk. "I've been digging. Look at this." He pointed to the line of ownership on a deed filed months before the fire. "Your name appears, but there's another signature added in the margins, dated later. Lorraine's hand isn't on it. But notice this witness?" His finger tapped the name. Marta Qualls. I froze. Marta, the real estate broker I'd known by name, had always seemed brisk, professional. Now her signature was tied to irregular filings. Arden's voice sharpened. "This isn't random. Lorraine must have leaned on her, maybe even bribed her. These papers were meant to edge you out long before the fire. That house burning wasn't just bad luck. It gave them the opening they'd prepared for." Shock gave way to rage, steady and clear. So it wasn't just betrayal at the dinner table. They were carving me off the records before I even smelled smoke. Arden met my eyes. "Exactly. And that means our case is bigger than family. It's fraud, forgery, maybe even conspiracy." The room seemed to tilt. Betrayal on paper cut deeper than any insult in a living room. My life's work wasn't just under attack. It had been systematically dismantled behind closed doors. I left Arden's office with copies of the new findings. Notebook pressed under my arm. Evening had settled by the time I reached the motel. I checked the locks twice, drew the curtains tight. Still, unease prickled at the back of my neck. When I set my cane against the nightstand, I froze. There, resting on the cheap wooden surface, was another note. Not under the door this time, inside, My heart kicked hard against my ribs as I unfolded it. Next time, it won't be paper. The words blurred for a moment as I gripped the page. The truth landing heavy. Shadows weren't just at the door anymore. They were already inside. The courthouse steps in Asheville had never looked heavier. Arden walked beside me, his case files tucked under his arm, while my cane tapped each stone as though it were taking attendance. I could feel the stares of neighbors, relatives, even strangers gathered outside. The weight of years, the betrayals, the lies, the fire that erased my home seemed to funnel into this one moment. Lorraine stood across the aisle with her lawyer, her chin raised, lips curled in confidence. Clayton hovered at her side, his shoulders drawn tight, like a man carrying a burden too heavy to hold. Behind them, Eva Linnell sat quietly, her young eyes darting between us, searching for truth. Inside, the courtroom hummed with whispers until the judge's gavel cracked the air. I lowered myself into the seat Arden had prepared, my heart steady despite the tremor in my hands. I wasn't here to win pride. I was here to claim what was rightfully mine, and to prove that truth still had a place in a family poisoned by greed. Franklin Cade was the first to testify. He stepped forward, hat in hand, the same way he had when warning me about the figures outside my burnt home. "Your Honor," he said firmly, "I saw cars parked across from Melvin's property the night of the fire. Not just once, several nights. They weren't neighbors. They stayed too long, lights off, like they were waiting for something." His words carried the cadence of a man not prone to exaggeration. Lorraine shifted for the first time, her hands clasping too tightly in her lap. Her attorney objected, but the judge waved it aside. Franklin's voice never wavered. "I've lived in that neighborhood for 40 years. You learn to tell when someone's lost, and when someone's lying in wait." Murmurs rippled across the room. For the first time, the confident mask on Lorraine's face slipped. She smoothed her skirt, eyes flashing toward Clayton, as if urging him to hold steady. Then Arden rose, his voice calm but sharp as a blade. He spread papers across the evidence table, tapping the lines with precision. "These real estate documents were filed months before the fire. Look closely at the signatures. You'll see one name appear again and again, Marta Qualls." Gasps echoed through the benches. Arden continued. "Not only was she involved, but the inconsistencies in these filings point to deliberate tampering. And who benefited from those alterations? Lorraine Dufresne." The judge leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Lorraine's face flushed deep crimson. Her lawyer shuffled through papers, stammering objections. But the damage was done. Neighbors who had once nodded politely at her in grocery store aisles now whispered openly, their doubt breaking into outrage. Arden's next words cut deeper than any flame. This was not the work of accident or negligence. It was a conspiracy designed to strip a man of his home, his legacy, and his dignity. I kept my gaze fixed on Clayton. His jaw twitched, his hands restless on his knees. When Arden finally called him to the stand, I saw the war inside him spill into the open. "Mr. Dufresne," Arden said gently, "did your wife encourage you to support actions that undermined your father's claim?" Clayton's lips parted, then closed. His eyes darted to Lorraine, whose glare could have cut through steel. Silence stretched, pressing on all of us. Finally, he exhaled a shudder. "Yes," his voice cracked. "She told me my father was old, that he didn't need the house, that I should think of our future. She said loyalty to her was proof I was a real man." A stir swept the courtroom. Lorraine shot up from her seat, hissing, "Don't you dare, Clayton." But the judge's gavel pounded her down. Clayton's shoulders collapsed. "I betrayed him because I thought love meant obedience, but it was manipulation. I see that now." His face crumpled as he turned toward me. "Dad, I'm sorry." The ache in my chest deepened, but I gave him a small nod. Forgiveness wasn't simple, but truth was finally cutting through. The judge called for order, then read the verdict. "This court finds in favor of Melvin Dufresne. The property and damages are restored. Evidence of fraud will be forwarded for criminal review." Lorraine exploded, her voice shrill. "You've all turned against me!" Bailiffs moved swiftly, guiding her out as her protests echoed down the hallway. Clayton remained seated, hollow-eyed, unable to follow her. Eva slipped down from the benches and reached for my hand. Her whisper was steady, grounding. "I'm still with you, Grandpa." The courthouse emptied, the noise fading into the evening air. Later, I walked alone through the cemetery where my wife rested. I laid the court papers against her headstone, as though handing her proof. My voice shook, not with fear, but with release. They tried to erase me, love. They tried to burn down what we built. But truth stood taller than fire. I placed my palm on the cool stone and breathed the lesson aloud. One last gift for whoever might listen. When family forgets love, money becomes poison, but truth will outlive even fire.